Lady and the Tramp. Chapter 6. Something was different. Lady felt it and smelled it. The house still looked the same. The front porch was still as lovely, the white latticework as bright as always against the cream-colored siding. The inside was still picture perfect. The room still cozy and the wallpaper covered with birds and flowers, still cheerful. But somehow, while everything was still the same, it had completely changed. The baby had arrived. Laying on her dog bed in the living room, Lady listened as Darling sang a lullaby to Lulu. The sound was soothing. Curious, Lady got up and quietly went up the stairs and to the door of the nursery. She peeked inside. Darling's back was slaty. She was rocking slowly back and forth, her long white gown shifting in the gentle breeze that blew from the window. Lady tried to get a glimpse of Lulu, but all she could see was a blanket. She gave a little yip to say hello. Jim Deer, who had been standing by the crib, jumped at the noise. He rushed to the door. "Shh," he whispered. He leaned down and ushered Lady from the doorway. "Sorry, girl, not now." Sadly, Lady turned and walked away around the hallway. Through the window in Darling and Jim Deer's room, she could look down at Trusty's house. She saw Trusty and his person eating at the table together in the kitchen. Trusty's human still wanted him around. She continued down the stairs. Pausing at a window, she glanced at Jock's house. The Scottish Terrier was sitting on a stool while her human, Stephanie, took photographs of her. Finishing up, Stephanie clapped her hands and opened her arms for a hug. Jock leaped off the stool and ran to her. Stephanie still wanted Jock around. But Darling and Jim Deer didn't want Lady around at all. They only wanted Lulu. Sighing, Lady walked down the rest of the stairs and into the living room. But as she headed for her bed, she heard a scratching noise by the living room window. Her ears perked up. As she looked at the window, the hair on her neck rose. Staring back at her was a pair of beady little eyes. The rat! It was back. Lady raced to the window, jumped up on her hind legs, and rested her paws on the windowsill. A low growl rose in her throat, and then let out a bark. The rat scampered away. The Lady kept barking. Hearing the sound of Jim Deer's footsteps on the stairs, Lady turned, expecting him to look happy for her good protecting. Instead, he looked angry. Confused, she let him pick her up, and carry her through the house and out the back door of the kitchen. Placing her down on the back porch, Jim Deer shook his head. Then, without a word, he went back inside, leaving Lady alone. Lady plopped down. When the baby moves in, the dog moves out, she said softly to herself. She didn't want to admit it, but that stray dog may have been right. The next few weeks, Lady found herself spending more and more time outside. She was still allowed to sleep on her bed in the living room, but she no longer got to cuddle with Jim Deer and Darling. Lulu got that spot. And long walks were over. If she was lucky, Jim Deer would take her for a quick walk down to the end of the street and back. She was beginning to think things couldn't get worse. And then Jim Deer and Darling packed their suitcase. And the next day, Aunt Sarah arrived. She burst into the house, a bag in her hand, setting it on the hall floor. She moved inside as if she owned the place. Coming down to greet her, Darling held Lulu in her arms. "Thank you so much for watching Lady while we're gone," she said, giving her aunt a quick kiss on the cheek. "Just dog sitting?" Aunt Sarah said, clearly not pleased by the news. "I thought I'd be in the company of little Lulu." Ignoring the woman's comment, Jim Deer gave her a strange smile. He turned from Aunt Sarah, walked over to Lady, and knelt down, giving her a quick pat on the head. He added, "Bye, Lady." And then, just like that, they headed out the door. It shut behind them with a dull thud. Lady raced to the window and watched as her people, her whole world, got into their Model T and drove down the street. "Don't leave me," she whispered, but it was too late. The car had already turned a corner and disappeared from view. Lady was alone with Aunt Sarah. Backing up so she was on the opposite side of the room, Lady watched as Aunt Sarah picked up her suitcase and headed upstairs. Aunt Sarah left behind a large basket which, as Lady looked on, began to move. Curious, Lady walked over just as the lid on the basket popped open. A moment later, 2 pairs of eyes peered over the edge, and then, to Lady's horror, a pair of identical cats slithered out. Lady quickly backed away from Devin and Rex as Devin and Rex moved into the room. They smiled slyly as they crisscrossed in front of each other, their steps in perfect unison. "Ew," began Devin. "This couldn't be our new home," finished Rex. He looked disgusted. "Not much space to stretch," Devin went on. "Our legs," Rex once again finished. Ignoring Lady, the cats stopped, and then their lips pulled back over their teeth. Rex continued, "But I think we could make some," in unison they hissed, "changes." Lady cringed. That didn't sound good. Then, as she watched the cats begin to destroy the living room, Devin jumped onto the couch and dug his claws into it. There was a ripping sound as the fabric tore. Rick went to the mantel, his eyes moving up and down the dark wood, stopping at the collection of knickknacks and dolls Darling had carefully put on the shelf. He leaped up smoothly and began to weave around the objects. Lady's breath caught. He was going to knock them over. "Be careful," she warned, but Rex didn't hear her, or didn't care. Lifting his paw, he swiped a porcelain figurine off the shelf. It fell to the floor, shattering into a dozen of pieces. Helpless to do anything, Lady watched as the cats continued to move around the room. They ripped up the carpet and shredded the lovely curtains Darling had made. They tore at the wallpaper and clawed at the floors. Lady had had enough. Letting out a growl, she took off after the cats. She chased them into the dining room. Both cats jumped onto the long table, their claws digging into the wood. As Devin slammed into a vase, spilling flowers and water everywhere, Rex jumped onto the antique cuckoo clock. Trying to shove his large body into the small of the window of the clock, he managed to break the bird that announced the hour. A moment later, the whole clock fell. Their job in that room done, the cats headed into the kitchen. Lady winced as she heard plates and glasses breaking. She faintly heard Aunt Sarah call out her name upstairs, but she didn't pay attention. Her focus was on the cats. Careering out of the kitchen, they raced by her and back toward the living room. Lady followed, but just as they got to the fireplace, the cats veered off in separate directions. Lady didn't have time to slow down. With a cry, she flew into the fireplace, sending ash shooting up into the air. Coughing and sneezing, Lady emerged from the fireplace. She looked up and froze. Rex and Devin were perched on top of the china cabinet. Inside, placed in the middle of all the other pieces, was the vase Aunt Sarah had given Darling. In horror, Lady watched as the cats began to rock back and forth. The cabinet began to move. Then, with a groan, it fell. As the china crashed down, the vase fell and miraculously landed safely on a chair, but then it started to roll on the edge. Lady rushed over and lifted her nose, stopping the vase just before it fell. She let out a sigh of relief. "Lady!" Startled by the sound, Lady turned around. Aunt Sarah stood in the doorway, her hands on her hips, meanness in her eyes. The vase, without Lady's nose to keep it stable, toppled to the ground. "My vase! The precious object shattered into 1,000 pieces!" screamed out Aunt Sarah. Lady lowered her head. She was in trouble. Big, big trouble.